So you talked earlier, and you said that the only images that you've ever had removed from your Facebook page were the ones making fun of the Klan. And a lot of people, I guess in certain parts of the country, like to pretend that racism is no longer a serious problem.
Right.
But you being from Louisiana, we're all from Georgia. Racism is still definitely a problem in this country. When you saw
Absolutely.
things like the Trayvon Martin case or the Troy Davis execution,
Right.
what was your reaction to those?
I was actually disgusted by both. For me, I don't personally have a problem we'll start with the Troy Davis case. I personally don't have a problem with the death penalty. It's not something that I think is necessarily morally wrong in cases where it's deserved. But when you have a case where it's not clear cut, where someone has had people recant their stories, then why not do further investigation? Or if you're still not sure, why not just give them life in prison? But I'll tell you something about the death penalty, and this is just from my view on it. If I committed a crime and I had the choice between life in prison or the death penalty, I would take the death penalty. Life in prison, to me, is a far greater, far harsher punishment than the death penalty. To me, the death penalty is an easy way out. But at the same time, when you're talking about an innocent person or possibly innocent person, executing them is just not, without going and making sure beyond a doubt that you have it on camera, that you have DNA evidence, that you have witnesses. At that point, we shouldn't be using it except in the most extreme cases where it is beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, going back to Trayvon Martin, that was, again, something where someone who had a gun, who shouldn't have had a gun, used it in a situation where without a gun, they never would have done what they did. But because he had a gun, he felt he could bully somebody, and when he initiated, from what we could tell, initiated a fight, possibly was getting the worst end of it, and decided that the only way out was to shoot the person that he attacked, then that's wrong. And I'm a gun owner. When I lived in Georgia, I had a concealed carry permit. I carried a gun, but I never used it to bully or intimidate anybody. And when you have people who use guns, whether it's George Zimmerman or some of these fanatics who have guns, are using it to intimidate people, and then use those guns beyond intimidation to actually kill somebody, and then try to claim that there wasn't some type of racial motivation behind it. That's, again, I mean, the racism is still very alive. And I'm actually not from Louisiana originally. I'm actually from Virginia. And where I grew up, there were very few people of any other race or anything other than white Southern Baptists who went to church every Sunday, and they did not care for anybody other than other white people. But the racism in the South is still very much there, and it's still something that is catered to heavily, both through companies trying to sell you a product or politicians trying to sell you themselves. It's still there. In this part of Louisiana, segregation is still very alive and well. It exists. There's churches that you can have two churches of the same denomination, which here is primarily Catholic, and that's it. You'll have churches and private functions held separately, one for white people and one for black people. And it's acknowledged and observed by both black and white people. They both self-segregate.
Would you say that regardless of innocence or guilt in the Trayvon Martin case and in the Troy Davis case, that the reason, not necessarily because they were innocent or guilty, the accused parties are innocent or guilty, but because of the race of the people involved, that it was handled very differently? The Troy Davis case being where an African-American man is accused of killing a white man, whereas in the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, an African-American was killed by, I don't remember if George Zimmerman was white or Latino. But
he was actually, his mother was Latino and his father was a white Jewish man.
But yeah, would you say that the handling of the case, or the cases, were definitely affected by the race of the victims versus the race of the accused?
Well, it wasn't just a race thing. I mean, there's prejudice there beyond race. Race was the main component, but it's also a class thing. Trayvon Martin was a black kid. He wasn't rich, but he was middle class. He was in a neighborhood where people tended to be wealthier, where a black kid would probably not be welcome. Troy Davis, as I recall, not only killed a white man, allegedly, but he also allegedly killed a white police officer.
Yeah, he was
off duty.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, when you involve not only race, but you involve a police officer, you get this certain amount of public outrage where somebody will get railroaded. And any time a police officer is killed, there's a public outcry. But when you throw race into it, you're throwing gasoline on a bonfire. Whether or not they're guilty, you don't get a fair trial. Not in that city, not in that county, sometimes not even in that state.
So this is going to probably wrap it up for us. And you've commented on this more than once on your blog, but with regards to U.S. foreign policy, the war on terror, and the U.S.'s, I guess you would say, military pursuits overseas, how do you think that's going for us, and how do you see that ending up?
As far as going, badly. Ending, disastrously. We've expanded, much like the Roman Empire, we've overexpanded ourselves. We're spending ourselves into a hole to prop up interests that can't support themselves. And we make enemies out of people who should be our friends. But we're going after oil, we're going after resources. Look at the countries that we're in. Look at the overall strategy. Who's going to be our next, after the Middle East, who's our next enemy? Who is the country that the war hawks beat the drums about? China.
Experts are
why are we
China.
going to, why do they want war with China? In what ways does China threaten us? Well, it comes down to two things: resources and money. And they're going to be a competitor with us. And it's the war. Our wars anymore, they're not about saving the Jews or saving our ally from invasion. that's not what those wars are about anymore. It's about resources and fighting over resources. And as our world's population grows, we're going to fight more and more over very limited resources. And we cannot just, we can't sustain that too much longer.
All right, well, that wraps us up. Couple of things just before we get into like the process of editing this. How exactly did you want to be introduced for when we go back and put the introduction at the beginning of the show? How did you want to be introduced when we first bring you on the air?
Okay, you can just go with Manny, because there's people that know me as Manny. You can say Manny from, Whiskey in the Morning After, or however you want to reference the page.
All right, and let me think. Anything else? We got everything we need. All right. Thanks a lot, man. This should be up in a couple of weeks. We can have we'll have the podcast up in a couple of days, maybe, guys.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
send me a link to that. And
yeah.
if you have any questions on it, you can just shoot me a message.
Yeah.
If you have anything after, any thoughts that come to you afterwards, you're like, oh, I forgot to ask him this, that, or the other. You can just shoot it over there to me, and I can respond back to you. I'm off until Monday morning.
All right. Well, we've we don't know when it's going to be airing on the show for like the campus area, but it shouldn't take us too long to have up the podcast.
The podcast is what I'm going to be able to get, because I'm in Louisiana. I can't pick up that signal all that way, and I think that's what most people are going to go with. Yeah.
That's going to be about the extent of it, but yeah. We'll let you know when we get through. If we have any sound editing, it's going to be for time, because we're at an hour and 15 right now, but that's not a big deal for the podcast.
You can cut out my ums and my pauses and where I repeat myself, because I do repeat myself sometimes.
Yeah. Other than that, man, thank you.
Thanks. That was fun.
We'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. No problem, man. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
That's the end of the interview, and that was Jordan interviewing Manny. I am Ifad, and we're ending the show here. See you next time, next week, at the same station. The voices that won't be televised will be heard on the radio.
So now it's your time to speak up.